welcome. This could be quite unusual to have archives presenting activities in IT, especially in digital transformations. But I would like to bring you a case that we are currently implementing and that we just have delivered, and no later than today for the last case. And I would like to bring a little bit you more in what the archives means and what we are working on. So the archives from the European Parliament keeps all the written archives that were produced since 1952 until now. So it corresponds more or less to 5 million archive records. And these 5 million archive records are split into two kinds of things. The first one are paper versions of documents that we keep, and for which we have something like 4 kilometers of material kept inside stockrooms in the European Parliament, plus 1.6 kilometers that we already transferred to the historical archives of the European Union, which are based in Florence, in Italy, because this entity has been created to store the archives, the historical archives from the overall institutions. And on top of these physical archives, we now start since some years, mainly 2016, we start to have some digital transfer. And this digital transfer corresponds to more or less 809 gigabytes of archives. So these are the archives that we have, and among 5 million records, which are hosted inside our archive management system, which is the central management system we are using. So why are we keeping all this information? And this is simply to answer some questions. So performing archives is pretty an interesting thing. You are delivered a set of materials, and then you have to analyze them, you have to describe them, you have to store them. And why do you do that? Simply because at any time someone could ask you a question to look for a document that is related to the evolution of the institution. And we received 306 questions last year, and it corresponds to the average of questions we receive every year, and half of them being related to reports. But we may have some questions on any kind of activities which is related to European Parliament. We recently had a question that is related about the audition that was made by Commandant Massoud in the European Parliament. We also have some questions about the relationships that were established by the European Parliament with South Korea, or, well, it's really a very diverse level of questions that we receive, and we have to provide an answer in a reasonable time frame. And who are our main clients requesting these questions? For 75% of them, it comes from the civil society, or researcher, or legal cabinet, or lawyers, but very often young researchers preparing PhDs. And 25% is related to the internal activity of the European Parliament, being members or colleagues from the legal service or the relationship with citizens. So this is why we keep all these documents to provide the adequate answer to the questions. So as you can see on the next slide, we are working quite strongly in the archives to ensure that we have the appropriate documents, that we can provide an access to them, but also that we provide the appropriate information on how the archives of the Parliament are working. And not only in terms of transfer, because we need to explain what we can keep, what we do not keep, in which status do we keep them, how it has to be prepared, because you can imagine that we do not have an army to treat 4.4 kilometers of paper archives, but we need to take time to do it. So having the appropriate description of what we are working on. So based on these two elements, document access and information about the archives, we put a focus on how to make it more easily accessible. I honestly prefer to spend some time by providing answers to the one of the relationships between the European Union or the European Parliament and some other countries or some political topics, rather than providing a report that should be public to citizens. So in this condition, what we want to do is to provide a maximum availability of the document, which could be very simply addressed by I'm looking for the report of this member, or I'm looking for a report that has been established by this committee at this specific period. So to provide the support in this case, we developed a conversational agent and a text summarizer. So we provide currently on the intranet of the European Parliament and will be extended to citizens in a very short time frame through our new website that should be open by the end of October. We are providing a set of information about what archives are and which type of information we have. So we provide not only the data themselves or the documents themselves, but we also provide a set of information on the context that enables you to understand how these archives were produced. And it's as important as the document itself to understand how it was produced. We are currently focusing on the delivery of all the old documents between 1952 and 1979. That corresponds to 200,000 documents that we just have released internally and that will be made available to the public. So these documents are split by different legislative terms, which is the period that we used in order to organize our documents. And as you can see on the right side, we've got a small agent with it, a soft boat that has been implemented that takes not only some opportunities to provide answer to questions, but which is also able to access information based on a structured approach. So you can have information such as where we are located, the map, the information or standards, different concepts used in the archive, but also what is available and how these fonts are structured. You can imagine that you will not go for one row about 200,000 documents, but you have a kind of tree approach, which is based on different cases that structure these archives. So we provide this information through both a direct access through the softboat, but also through natural language processing. Currently, we only have implemented English, but we will implement it quite soon in other languages. And this softboat is an implementation of a software as a service. This is a company called Chatlayer that you are using to implement the boat. Of course, once you want to access a document, we provide several questions to try to identify which document it corresponds to. And in the end, once we identify the document based on its reference or the committee, the year, the documents available, the language that you would like to have an access, because we have several languages of the same document. And in the end, you may have an access to the document you are looking for, such as the one which is just illustrated. So you receive a PDF version of the document. So we are using both approach. One approach is through natural language processing, by which we try to identify the demand which is performed by a colleague or a citizen. And on the other side, we can have a kind of train that guides you through our hierarchy until you identify the documents that you are potentially looking for. So this is the way that we provide an archive, a view on our archives by, on one side, providing an explanation on the data we have and the document we have, generally as an historical context, then more locally on the different periods to understand what was the main work conducted by the Parliament at this time being, and at the same time using the softboat to allow you to browse inside our collections and to have an access to the document which is communicable and that you can download. In order to complement this approach by providing a new way to access documents for the citizen, we developed at the same time a new service, which is a text summarizer. So why did we do that? It's very often that you may have a document which is quite long, and you would really like to know if you will spend all this time by reading the very long document or not. And what happens is that when you have this kind of approach by browsing information sites, you will see that you have the 5 or 6 first lines of the document that you can go through, and then you check if you have the feeling that this could be interesting for you. We decided to choose another approach. So if you have a very long document, and whatever language is, because we are currently running over 100 different languages with different rates of quality, but for these languages, we build automatically a summary by extraction of the document that you have. So if you have a document which is about 100 pages, we ask to reduce the document with a summary by automatic extraction of corresponding to the size of 10% of the original size, and then we obtain a summary, an automatic summary of the text that corresponds to 10% of the initial size of the document, so that you do not have the first lines, but you have the ones that we identified as being the most important part of the document that you can read, have a walkthrough, and if it interests you, then in this case, you can consult the document and have an access to this one. We have other technologies that we are currently establishing. All of them are based on artificial intelligence. In the case of the self-bot on one side, this is also the case of the text summarization, which is using AI algorithm, but we are also using other AI algorithm in the context of the OCR of the documents, because we have documents which are PDF rasterized. So these are images, not text documents. And because these documents are too old, they were not digitally natively produced. So we need to scan these ones. Now we need to recognize the text which is inside. And then we will launch activities of automatic classification and named entity recognition, both related on AI algorithm. And we expect to provide ways to search for the documents based on these two approaches by the first trimester of next year. Again, we try to do that independently from the original language of the document. So this was mainly what I wanted to introduce you. This is the way that we access documents from the archives throughout a quite large corpus. Of course, out of the 5 million of items that we have, we only release 200,000. But I would say that's really a first step. And we are trying to change the way that we are communicating with citizens and colleagues, so that it's more easy for them to look for information and to have a better understanding on the context that they are using them. So thank you very much for having followed this presentation. I hope it was interesting for you.